Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Kālaḥ svabhāvo niyatir yadṛcchā bhūtāni yoniḥ puruṣa iti cintyā Saṁyoga eṣāṁ na ātma-bhāvād ātmāpy anīśāḥ sukha-dukkha hetuh. Read the translation once again. Should time, one's own nature, destiny, chance, or the elements be considered the origin, or puruṣa, the indwelling consciousness, it cannot be a combination of these, time, etc., because of the presence of ātman, the indwelling consciousness, also not ātman, which is powerless because of the cause of pleasure and suffering. The first part of this mantra, the first section of this mantra, summarizes just the topics of the discussion that these Brahmavadins who discourse on Brahman, the collection of the teachings of the masters, the first meaning of the word Brahman, particularly when it is used in its plural form, then it refers to the mantras of the Vedas. So when they came together and started their discussion, these were the topics that they had discussed. In trying to find out what Brahman, the ultimate cause of everything, could be amongst these. Now the next portion, this was the portion that we read and discussed in our previous session. Now the second part of this mantra, it cannot be a combination of these, etc. This section summarizes why they seemed like unsatisfactory. And then what is the solution? That is then when sage Śvetāśvatara starts giving a discourse which is rooted in his own experience, his own meditative experience. So the first part of the second portion is, let's read it once again. It cannot be a combination of these, time, etc., because of the presence of ātman, the indwelling consciousness. So a combination of these, all of them, time, the natural tendency of this universe to appear in the way it does, destiny, chance, and even the 5 elements. And all of them, a combination of these, it cannot be a combination of these. A combination of these cannot be considered Brahman, the ultimate cause of everything, because there is something very different present within us, which cannot be reduced merely to any one of these. And that is this ātma-bhāvād. Bhava means presence, Bhu means in Sanskrit to be, and bhava means presence. Presence of Atman. This word Atman is usually translated with self. That's a little bit a misleading translation, because in English by self usually we understand this notion of self, this ego, this I. And this is precisely what Atman is not. On the contrary, Atman is that underlying light, or that inner space in which that notion of a limited self arises like a thought. Like all thoughts arise, this thought that we have of ourselves, like we have representations of all the things around us, we have also a representation of one's own self. And in which that arises, that space, that inner space, that inner light, that is what Atman stands for. That's why ātma-bhāvād, the true nature of the self, might be a better translation in English, the true nature of the self. However, the Sanskrit word Atman is very interesting because it means quite a lot more than simply self, even though it is always translated into English as self. Okay. Just trying to remember. The first meaning that, because this word has been derived from a particular root, and that root can have different meanings. So, the first meaning, yadṛcchā, that which permeates everything, that which pervades everything. Even if we don't believe right now, it might just be a belief. One day it might become an experience. So, but today it's a belief that consciousness pervades everything out there. That's a belief. So let's put that aside because it's a belief. But that it permeates the entire body, that is not a belief. That is an experience. We are conscious from the tip of our toe up to. So it permeates. It is in that sense that this mantra, of course there are parts in our body which are unconscious. For example, our nails don't have consciousness, or even our hair are unconscious. But still, generally speaking, it permeates most of the body. And even those areas of which we seem relatively unaware, a practitioner of yoga can extend one's awareness into those portions as well. So, to a great extent, even if not 100%, but still this consciousness, it permeates this, let's call it now sentience, this capacity to feel. This permeates the entire body. Yadṛcchā, so that which permeates. The grammatical definition doesn't say what it permeates, it just says that which pervades, that which, like space, that which pervades. Yadṛcchā. And that into which everything merges, thoughts arise, and where do they go? That is, so that into which everything merges. So that which pervades, Atman means that which pervades. Atman means also that into which things merge. And the idea behind this is that usually anything that arises out of something also merges into it. For example, all the rivers, they arise out of the ocean, and then eventually they merge into it. So the final merging place is also the actual origin. That is the idea behind this. So the second meaning of Atman is the final resting place. That's all, just verbal meaning of whatever, but just final resting place. So yadṛcchā yadādatte. And the third meaning, experience, that which experiences, that which feels, that which experiences the objects, that within us which experiences the objects of seeing, the objects of hearing, the objects of taste, the object of smell, the objects of touch, as well as the internal objects such as pain and pleasure, a sixth category, which cannot be experienced through the five senses of perception, but are experienced through what is known the inner sense of perception, the inner instrument, the mind. Pain or anger, these kinds of feelings that arise, all of them, the internal feelings, they are perceived internally. So the one that experiences all of them. So the experiencer, the one that is experiencing, that is also the meaning of the word Atman. Yadṛcchā yadādatte yadṛcchāti vishayāniḥ. Yes, and then comes the deepest meaning. At also means continuous presence. I'm just speaking about this root, at, which is the root, and at the various meanings of this root, at. The last and the deepest meaning of this root, at, is a continuous presence. So even if things are changing, oscillating, if the movement goes up and down, yet that continuous presence, that too is what the word Atman stands for. So the word Atman, just again to summarize the different meanings, that which pervades, number one, the final resting place, number two, number three, the one that experiences, and number four, a continuous presence, a continuous being. In fact, being itself is continuous. It was not in the sense of a being, but being, just being, a continuous presence. So these are the four meanings of the word Atman. And due to the presence of this principle, it is very difficult to see how time, the nature of things as they are, which we discussed, destiny, chance, and even the five elements, they can account for something so radically different from each one of them. The more we explore its property, its that first person experience of consciousness, the more one explores it, the more one meditates on it, that sentience, it is very difficult that how all these things which we experience from a third person's perspective should account for this first person inner, very deeply personal experience. I think what is being pointed here is what modern philosophers now refer to as the hard problem of consciousness. In a way, I would say to a great extent, it's first of all a very non-reductionist view that consciousness cannot be reduced to the five elements. That is the first main thing about this. And the second thing, that how Atman is so radically different, this consciousness is so radically different from all of these that have been mentioned, how it is radically different. Okay. The Charvaka view, which was the materialist view prominent in those ancient times, that of course believed that consciousness can be reduced to the four elements. It just accepted four elements, which means earth, water, fire, and wind. Just these four, because the materialistic Charvaka view did not believe even in inference. So the presence of space has to be inferred. It cannot be directly perceived, and that's why even with space, they did not accept it. But the four elements, and they say how consciousness arises out of it, very simple. When you put all different things together, barley, etc., none of them has the intoxicating property in it. But you mix them together, ferment them. Suddenly, when you make beer or wine out of those things, then a very specific property which was not present in any one of them arises out of them. That is their argument. So in the same way, when you put together all these four elements in a certain way, just consciousness arises. That is their argument. However, the Upanishadic view of arising of consciousness is a little bit more subtle than that. Which is what this Upanishad will discuss instead of going into depth right now. When we will study those mantras, we will see how the Upanishads, they discuss this idea of consciousness. But nonetheless, the Upanishadic view is that consciousness cannot be reduced to, it is not reducible to any one of these. This sentience, this deeply personal quality with which we experience this entire world, this cannot be reduced to all these that have been listed, because it seems so radically different from each one of them. One of the biggest differences is this idea of Saṁyoga, combination. While each one of them seems, and that's why earlier in my previous discussion when I was talking about Kālaḥ, I pointed out that Kālaḥ comes from Kālaḥ. Kālaḥ, which means paths. So each one of these can be divided further into paths. It seems like all of them, they are made up of paths. No such paths can be recognized in the case of consciousness. That is the idea. So it's not a combination of many things, but it is not a combination of tangible parts like our body, for example, which can be divided into different parts, or even our mind, which can be divided, the stream of thought can be divided into discrete thoughts, or even our sense of I, this ego, this can be divided into different parts. We have different understandings of ourselves, and these parts keep on changing. And then even our memories, they keep on changing. So even those subtle aspects of our mind which keep on changing, even they are parts, and there Vedanta has no problem in accepting them to be fundamentally material in nature. So even thoughts, even this sense of I is based on the subtle aspects of matter in the understanding of Vedanta. But what about this light of consciousness, which is present in every thought that arises? Thoughts do change, but that light, that inner light of consciousness, that doesn't seem like changing. And of which parts is it made of? There seem to be no parts, and that is why this is again a very detailed discussion. But Prashnopanishad, the fourth Upanishad, this is the 11th Upanishad. The fourth Upanishad is all about this, which at the end of which the teacher Pippalada, I just have finished a course in Swami Ram Sadhagram on the 13th on this Upanishad, where at the end Sage Pippalada concludes that his experience, his meditative experience of Atman is Nishkala or Akala. Akala, Nishkala, they mean the same thing, which means Kala, as I pointed out in my previous session, means parts. And Nishkala and Akala means partless, in which there are no parts. That which cannot be further divided. And I often think, is there any relationship between the word atom, and Atman? I don't know, I have not checked this fact, but because originally the atomistic idea was that atom is that which cannot be further divided, which is not made of parts. But paramanu, the Sanskrit word of paramanu, anu, means that it is smaller, and it can be, you can from anu you can go into anutara, you can go into anutama, which means from an atom you can go into something which is more subtle, and from that into the subtlest. And the subtlest is again considered consciousness, Atman. But that's not atom. That's not what the atomistic philosophers see as atom, because Atman is both subtler than the most subtle and mightier than the mightiest. That's how the Upanishads put it. Anoraniyan, which means more subtle than the atom, and Mahato Mahiyan, and bigger than the grandest. So if space, infinite space is the biggest, is the greatest, can be conceived as the grandest, then consciousness in the understanding of the Upanishadic masters is grander than space. Space itself arises within consciousness itself. That's how fundamental the Upanishadic masters see consciousness. And that is Nishkala or Akala, devoid of any parts. And how to reduce that which is devoid of any parts to those which clearly have parts. This is the problem that the masters here encountered in the first portion of this mantra, when it says that it cannot be a combination of these, time, etc., because of the presence of Atman, the indwelling consciousness which is beyond of any parts. How can it be reduced to those which have parts? They are two radically different entities. That which has parts and that which is totally partless, that which cannot be divided, in which there is no division at all. They are totally incompatible with each other. But then, okay, then why not the other option? Then just say that consciousness is the cause of everything. Is consciousness the cause of everything? Then the problem comes, the way we experience consciousness present within this body. First of all, it feels like totally limited to this body. Secondly, if it would be the creator of everything that it experiences, then why would it create suffering for itself? Why would it create suffering? That's the question. If consciousness itself is considered the creator of everything, then why would consciousness create suffering, which is for the experiencer totally pratikula, which means unfavorable, which is totally unfavorable. Why would it create something which is unfavorable? If it is the creator of everything, it wouldn't create something which is unfavorable. This is what lies at the core of the next part of this mantra, that also not ātman, even consciousness, this indwelling consciousness, which is powerless, which seems so powerless. Why does it seem powerless? What is the argument behind it being? Isha means Lord, and anīśāḥ is the opposite of that, which Isha means Lord, that which has power over everything, and anīśāḥ is the absence of that, completely powerless. It is dependent, not even one's own master. But why? Because of the cause of pleasure and suffering. Why is it not free? Why is it so powerless? Because, first of all, yes, where does it seem like powerless? In its pleasure and pain. If it would be enough powerful, it would choose just pleasure for itself and would avoid suffering altogether. Yet, suffering remains an inevitable part of our existence because of the cause of these two. What is the cause of these two? In the understanding of the masters, the cause of these two are our own radiant and dark deeds. That is what is seen, what is understood by the word cause here in this context. So just to explain the words a little bit more, pleasure and suffering, the Sanskrit words simply mean a good inner space and a bad inner space. The Upanishadic masters always speak about three spaces. One is this external physical space. In Chandogya Upanishad, this discussion comes. That is bhūtākāsha, this external space. And then they speak of a second type of space in which pleasure, pain, feelings, thoughts, and all the impressions of the world arise within, which means this mental space, the psychological space, which when we sit down in meditation, we feel this. When we close, we see boundaries, but when we open our eyes, we see boundaries. But when we close our eyes, it's just there are no boundaries, and we gain better access to this inner space in which all different thoughts, emotions, memories, pictures, all of them, they arise. That is what the masters call the inner space, the inner mental space, the inner psychological space in which pleasure and pain arise. It is somehow deeply connected to external circumstances as well as internal circumstances. And because of that, sometimes it's very pleasant, inner sunshine, and sometimes there are also tremendous cyclones coming up, emotional cyclones in the sense of anger, fear, they come up within. So it is that inner space in which sometimes it is very pleasant, warm, like it is beautiful on a sunny day like today, also inside when we are totally. That is sukha, when ka, which means space, is good within. And dukkha means when that inner space. So here we are talking about the inner suffering, inner happiness and inner suffering. If consciousness would be powerful enough, then it would completely be capable of reducing those sufferings. But because those sufferings arise, and we are also aware of their cause, and their cause is usually the subtle impressions, and the cause of the subtle impressions are the unconscious impressions which have been impressed upon the mind by past good, which means in Sanskrit, the Sanskrit word is radiant and non-radiant deeds. Radiant deeds, which means deeds which arise out of knowledge and understanding, they are seen as radiant deeds. And non-radiant deeds which are performed mechanically out of ignorance or being guided by the concomitants of ignorance, which is ego, attachment, hatred, and fear. Deeds which are guided by ignorance and its concomitants. So the impression of those deeds. So this is how both of them, even puruṣa, the last one listed in the previous portion of this mantra, which we discussed the last time, even that cannot be considered to be the cause because of this. Even if that indwelling consciousness would be considered the cause, then why would it give rise to that which causes suffering? If I'm the creator, then I will just create a heaven for me. Why is there then this hell around me? So, they could reach no conclusion through their verbal discussions, in words. That is when they started looking for answers in themselves. When after a lot of deliberation they could not find a satisfactory answer, they looked in themselves for answers through meditation. In fact, the Sanskrit word for meditation is very beautiful. And this is why I say that Sanskrit grammar, as a grammar, has all these ideas in the language itself. Because the grammarians were sages like Patanjali, who had these deep experiences. So, for example, the well-known word for it's not writing anymore. Samadhi. This is the word, samadhi. So I think because it is wet. That's the reason. And the word for answer in Sanskrit is samadhana. We all use these words, particularly this word in Hindi language also, samadhana. You had a question which was really bothering you, and then we ask, has your question been samadhana? Which means now, is all well now? So sometimes samadhana does not even necessarily should be an answer in yes and no. It's more like that tremendous desire of knowing which unsettles, which sometimes the masters say, the expression is sometimes when ignorance starts to pain like a thorn in the feet. When ignorance feels like that pain, shalyavat, like that thorn in the feet. And then when you find an answer, to that question, when a question feels like a thorn in the heart, and then when you find an answer to that, that is called samadhana. And both of them, they are deeply related, because I would say that samadhi is what leads to samadhana. The more we focus, the more we become attentive, the more we become aware, then the light itself illuminates the answer. The light, the inner light, and that is what Patanjali calls the inner teacher of yoga. The outer teacher is just a means, an instrument to connect us with this inner teacher, this light of yoga, yoga pradipa. Guruji used this word from Vyasa's commentary on the Yoga Sutras to give his title of the famous book, Light on Yoga. But if you look at the Sanskrit title of the same book, it is Yoga Pradipa, the lamp, the light of yoga. It is that inner light of yoga, because the practice of yoga makes us more attentive. It focuses us more. And then we start noticing things which we fail to notice because of the restlessness of our mind. Either because our mind is too restless, or it always goes between these two extremes, restlessness, torpor, but never, it cannot remain in between for a long time. It's very difficult for the mind to remain in between, to avoid both extremes of restlessness and torpor. But that fine line is like a rope on which only a yogi, only a practitioner of yoga, by which I mean someone who has trained his mind to focus and to settle down, only such a person can walk. And the idea is that here in this case, if what we are looking for is the cause of everything, then it must be also the essence of everything. And because it is the essence of everything, that's why it also must be my essence. And because it is my essence, then I should be able to find it by looking carefully within myself. And that's why I should look for it in myself. That is the idea. And so that is the path that the Upanishadic masters always, that's the yogic path, that's the path of yoga. That is how the word yoga in this context came into being. When the Vedic masters use the word yoga, they always use it in this context. So just to point out the logic behind looking within oneself. Okay. Any questions till here, or should we read the next verse? Should we start reading the next verse? Yes. Yes.
Do you follow this conclusion, or what is your line? What's the line that you follow? Or do you follow any line? What's your conclusion?
From all that I have, in all these years, studied, practiced, and explored, this is what makes sense to me.
What makes sense?
This path, because he's asking about this path of yoga, isn't it? Is that what you were asking? This path of inner exploration, to look oneself, to look within oneself. That was his question. So to me, yes, it is that path. This is the reason that I enjoy studying these texts in the first place myself. This is the reason I enjoy talking about them tremendously. This is the reason why to to take a very practical approach to it. I'm here, I attend the yoga classes whenever I can. I meditate when I'm in peaceful moments. And I constantly, like someone who is searching within oneself. That's what let's say what keeps me going, what propels me in whatever that I'm doing. So yes, the Upanishads, and I feel that whenever doubts arise, whenever questions arise, then and I wouldn't say that all the doubts have been eradicated, all the doubts have been removed, but solutions, samadhana, are certainly ample there in the Upanishads to various problems that come up when we start exploring particularly this deepest mystery of a human being, which is consciousness. The more we start thinking about it, the more we start the more we start meditating on it, the more we start exploring it, the kind of problems that arise when we start dealing with it, particularly on a linguistic level, on a conceptual level, because language is not devised to speak about consciousness. It was created to speak about those things which are illuminated by consciousness, objects of consciousness, not consciousness. Similarly, concepts are generally always about objects of consciousness, not that of which they are the objects. So, and of course I'm not saying this is the only approach, and I'm not saying this is the only correct approach. I'm exploring two what seem like radically different approaches. One is this Upanishadic approach, which is a meditative approach, and there is a radically different approach from this, which is the complete opposite of it. Yet it is a meditative approach as well, which is the Buddhistic approach. Because here, if everything is about ātman that I was talking about, then in the Upanishad, it's all about anātman, selflessness. So the approach is very, very different. And yet both are meditative approaches. So, yes, it makes tremendous sense. Yes, you had to.
Yes, as we were talking about Brahman and Atman, is that when Brahman is permanent, but Atman is impermanent, which is because you say it means it also means truth of the true nature of self, but it also the final resting place, and which is moved, something like changeable.
Yes,
right?
yes. So the question is, please repeat the question again.
So is that both of them, which is also meaning the consciousness, which is pure consciousness, which is in a willing consciousness, but one is permanent, but another one is impermanent.
Yes. The impermanent one is this notion of self. That is impermanent. That is certainly impermanent because it keeps on changing throughout our life. My own perception, it accumulates a lot of thoughts and ideas which I have about myself as I grow up, and some of them keep on changing. So that is impermanent. The sense of myself that I have, that ego, that ahamkara, that is certainly totally impermanent. What is the underlying essence which is present within myself? Is that permanent or impermanent? That is the question that needs to be asked. The space within the pot, is it different from the space out of the pot? That is the question that needs to be asked. Everything that is present within the space, within the pot, yes, that is impermanent. But what about the space? Yes, you put water in it, you remove water in it. You put grains in it, you remove grains in it. But can you put space in it and remove space in it? That's the question we have to ask. Is that which is always present, whether whatever you put into it or whatever you remove it? And in that sense, how is that space within the earthen jar, how is it different from the space outside? These are the questions that the masters ask.
So this is also the object what we are practicing through yoga, which we have to balance with ātman and bhūtāni.
What yoga does, yoga, for example, particularly Sage Patanjali's approach to yoga, it does not give us too many answers. It just shows us the path. Shows us the path to settle down, to make the mind peaceful, to become inward facing instead of facing outward. It helps us how to settle down the mind, how to calm down the mind, and how to become inward facing, which means to notice what lies deep within oneself. To notice that. That's all what the yogic path does. The answers ultimately have to be looked for ourselves.
So is this also the path from ātman to bhāvād?
Yes. That is the idea, in fact, to the path from Atman to Brahman. Simply what you are saying, I'm just trying to paraphrase that for more clarity. It is to understand that the space, the seemingly limited space within the pot, is not radically different and in no way, in fact, in any way different from the space which is there around the pot. This realization, this understanding, simply because our vision is conditioned by that covering of that covering of space, because our vision is limited by that. That's why we think that space is also limited. But in reality, space is so subtle that earth cannot limit it, because space permeates earth as well. Space permeates earth as well. So even in that covering, on the basis of which you are creating a distinction between space within the earth and space around the earth, even that covering consists of space. And if you realize that through your inner eye, then you see that the space within the pot is as infinite as the space out of the pot. And that is what, for example, the first mantra, that is infinite, and this too is infinite. The realization that this too is infinite. The space, this too, that and this, both of them are infinite.
So the pot is saying is a soul.
Sorry?
The pot.
The pot is the body. The pot is the body. The pot is the body. The water in it is the mind. It can the image can be developed in various ways, but the pot is the body, and that's why the Sanskrit word for pot in the songs, beautiful songs composed by great mystics over the past 1,000 years, the Sanskrit word for pot has also been used interchangeably for body as well. Ghatahi khojo re bhai. For example, if you want to search for that highest essence, look in the pot. What does he mean? I think it's by Kabir Das ji, the great 15th century mystic. So what does the pot there mean? Just this body. Look in this body. Search for it within this body, within this pot. So the word pot interchangeably has been used by the masters for the physical body.
But it's not easy to recognize or reach the Brahman.
Is consciousness easy? Is defining consciousness easy? Is understanding consciousness easy? Is talking about consciousness easy? Is conceptualizing consciousness easy? No. No one ever said that.
But maybe we don't even know what is that. Many things.
yet no one can deny it. Because even if you deny it, the one that is denying it because that person is conscious. Consciousness is what witnesses knowledge as well as the absence of knowledge. When you say, I know, it's because you are conscious. When you say, I don't know, it is still because you are conscious. Only a conscious person can witness both knowledge as well as ignorance. And that's why consciousness is not exactly the same like knowledge. Yes, knowledge, the path goes through knowledge because we have to move away from ignorance. So that's why we have to walk towards knowledge. But the path goes not towards knowledge, but through knowledge. Not towards knowledge. It's a difference. It's not towards knowledge, but it goes through knowledge. Sattva is not the final goal. The final goal is to even go beyond sattva. Again and again, we have talked about this so many times. But it has to be repeated like a mantra, just because, yes, we repeat, but we repeat it. Why do we repeat? Because these concepts, to become strong enough so that they express themselves in our daily living, daily life, daily exchanges with the world around us. These ideas, they have to become very strong. And for that, first of all, they have to settle down in our mind. And my teacher used to say that these concepts are like frogs. You grasp them while you discuss them, and then the moment you walk out, they jump out. So, and then we forget, like frogs. So these Mandukya Upanishad, the idea comes from one of the Upanishads. Because they jump out, and then we again forget, and we again start behaving as if none of this is true. So it has to, slowly and slowly, it has to get established. Like our asana, why do we do an asana every day? So that it becomes settled into our body. The samskara becomes settled. In the same way, these thoughts, these ideas, they are repeated again and again, so that while we are dreaming, just this reminder that we are dreaming, you are dreaming. And that's when something beautiful happens. That's when we start dreaming lucidly. That's when we start becoming aware of our dreams. And that's a beautiful experience. Yes, indeed. Because the next verse is about this veil. This truth is veiled, tremendously veiled. So an effort has to be made to again and again open that veil, remove that veil again and again. And that effort, that is what dhyana is about, and that is what the next verse is about, which we will discuss now. I think the time is no more enough to start a new verse. So we will start this next Saturday, the next verse, which will be about meditation. If any still questions, we have. Yes.
I was wondering, you were talking about doubts. So, what kind of doubts? Like doubting that there is God, about practice, or
Yes, and whether doubt about whether this is the correct answer or not. When we have a question, then an answer comes. Then I go to the extent that I say that part of manana, critical analysis, is to not just straight away accept anything, but to doubt it, to test it. It is what we call in Sanskrit sthuna nikhanananyaya in Sanskrit we call it. It's when you bang into the earth a nail, or then you look if it is moving a little bit, and even if it is moving a little bit, you hit it once more. So doubting everything is that approach we take towards our own conclusions, that we have reached a conclusion and then again let us look if someone else, first of all, does my understanding, is there something that I know which casts a shadow of doubt on it? And if my understanding is not good enough, then let me explore someone else's understanding. And let me see if there... So it's like testing oneself from all the different views. Not running away from those views, but really engaging with those views. Not getting prejudiced against those views, but allowing those views to come forward and testing what we are doing. That is when firm conviction, that is when the kind of conviction that really is capable of leading us on this path, which that firm conviction, that is what the masters call shraddha. When we are in a state where we can hold something as true. Yes, now this seems like the best possible option. Let's accept it and now proceed further from there. But before that, it should be tested from all the different sides. That's why Shravana, listening to the teachings, then Manana, critical analysis. So first of all, critical analysis, and then does it even relate to my own experience or not? And if it does not relate to my experience, then it's of no use for me. Then it cannot guide me on my path. If what you as my teacher are telling me, and if I cannot relate with it from my own experience, then how can I use it to guide me in my personal journey? It might have been useful for you, but not for me.
Sometimes not to, maybe not now.
Yes, that is another. That is yes. That is, but then now, that's generally when a teacher's view does not make sense to me, then my approach is not to reject it altogether. That is respect. That he or she is a great teacher. They must, whatever they say must be rooted in their own experience. Today maybe I'm not on that level of experience. That's why I cannot relate. Maybe one day, by working hard on myself, I might be able to relate, but till then, I cannot accept it, simply based on faith, because of what he said. That I cannot do. That doesn't work. At least with me, that doesn't work. I can respect it, but I cannot work with that, because it just doesn't work for me. That's how I am. As an individual, it doesn't work. So if somebody says Patanjali said this and that's why this must be true, then that doesn't work for me. For me, it doesn't work. So just telling how I deal with these things, with the Upanishads, for example. So many ideas in the Upanishads which don't make sense to me, they are just on stay, on hold. Say, okay, maybe one day that makes sense to me. Today it doesn't. And because it doesn't, then I cannot proceed on this without that. So they are on hold.
Like our everyday asana practice.
Yes.
Sometimes the teacher's instruction.
Yes.
I'm thinking, how impossible?
How impossible?
Someday,
Yes, one day. That has happened to me also. Yes. What seemed totally impossible 10 years ago seemed like this is utterly crazy. Today it makes complete sense. It makes total sense. So then it's perfect. Then it means that I have now evolved to the level of this teaching. That is the idea. Until then, why should I accept that teaching? Because originally the masters were the ones who chose our level. Today all the teachings are freely accessible. So we have to choose. We have to choose the teaching which is applicable on our level. Because today all the Upanishads and everything is freely accessible. So we have to choose our own level. So let us conclude with a few moments of silence to imbibe. सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत्। ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः। My humble salutations to you.